Hello, my name is Patty Lopez. I'm a client relationship manager at SGL Wealth Management. Want to thank you for joining us for the Strategic Guidance for Life educational series. We host these once a month with our goal in mind to help you make good financial decisions. Today we will be discussing behavioral finance. I'm pleased to have with me Mary Fenton. She is an internal business consultant for Manulife John Hancock Investments. She has been with John Hancock for 2 years and covers Southern Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, as well as Georgia. Prior to joining John Hancock, Mary was a student at Boston College, where she achieved her bachelor's in psychology and master's in business administration. She was also a member of the women's rowing team. In her free time, Mary enjoys baking, needlepointing, and spending time with her family. Welcome, Mary, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Patty, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone watching this. My name is Mary Fitton, and I'm with Manulife John Hancock Investments, and I'm here today to present to you My Brain Made Me Do It. In today's presentation, we will have an opportunity to investigate how we typically make decisions, understand how decision-making processes contribute to common investing mistakes, and learn how to train our brain to avoid those mistakes. Now, I won't give you a pop quiz, but I will tell you that the single most fundamental principle of investing is to buy low and sell high. In fact, this is what people most often mess up, and they often do the opposite. That isn't just conjecture, it's science. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman won a Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002 for his studies on the decision-making processes we go through when investing. Dr. Kahneman said that people have two ways of making decisions. The first is intuitively. When making an intuitive decision, your mind makes no real conscious effort and it's something you just know. The second is reflective. And when making a reflective decision, you're more likely to take your time, analyze the data, and weigh your options. Reflective decisions require more time and more thought. Now, which type of decision do you think is more readily used by investors? It's intuitive. Dr. Kahneman's studies and the studies of others led to a change in how we view economics from a personal level. The old school way of thinking, classical economics, holds that people are rational, self-interested, and have a firm grasp on self-control. Behavioral economics, the new school of thinking, shows instead that we aren't as logical as we might think, we rely too much on others, and we aren't as disciplined as we'd like to be. So, we understand that we like quick and easy decisions that require minimal thought, but we're dealing with money here, your money, and that's something we shouldn't take lightly. So how do we change that behavior? By approaching investing with a new mindset, you might be able to minimize the effect that these tendencies have on your long-term goals. So today, we're going to explore 6 common investor mistakes and how you can train your brain to make better and more thoughtful investment decisions. Those 6 tendencies are loss aversion, anchoring, status quo bias, procrastination, hindsight bias, and availability. Jumping into things, we'll first talk about loss aversion. This can be described as people's tendencies to strongly prefer avoiding losses than acquiring gains. And some studies suggest that losses are twice as powerful psychologically than our gains. Think of people who have old cars they keep putting money into. They can't get rid of the car, even though it's practically on life support. Why? Usually just because they've replaced some vital part of the car, and so they feel they can't take a loss on the car by getting rid of it. Gambling sees the same phenomenon. You place a $5 bet and you lose. Then you put in 10, 20. You're not focused on winning, but rather trying to avoid a loss. The impact of the gain isn't strong enough to register. It's the loss that registers in your brain. This tendency can lead to poor investment choices as well. And some examples might be investing too conservatively for your time horizon or selling stocks during a market downturn. For each tendency we review, we'll look at some common warning signs that might help you identify when you're experiencing each tendency. When people experience loss aversion, they may say something like, I can't sell now, it's down too far. It'll come back eventually. Or, I don't mind staying in cash. Market has been crazy lately. I'd rather be safe. If either of these statements sound familiar, there are some steps you can take. First and foremost, expect that there will be ups and downs in the market. Over time, that's a given. It's also a great idea to involve impartial people in your decision-making process, as they're less likely to be clouded by emotion. Lastly, you should create a plan and make sure you have an emergency fund set up. One way to do this is by starting a dollar cost averaging or automatic investment plan. What you do is you set aside a fixed amount of money each week or each month and continue doing that no matter what is happening in the markets. And that can help keep you on track towards your long-term goals. The second tendency is anchoring. Anchoring is your ability to concentrate and focus. It's a common human tendency to rely too heavily, or anchor, on one trait or piece of information when making decisions. Think about the dot-com bubble burst that lasted from 2000 to 2002, the Great Recession from 2008 to 2010, or most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic that took hold of the world in 2020. All of these events caused investors to feel scared, fearful, and unsure of their next investment steps. Yet when we look at this graph on the screen here and change our focus to the long term, it can help bring us back to a more rational way of thinking and not anchor on one specific stock market event. You can see here, stock growth doesn't occur in a straight line. In any given year, the stock market's returns might be negative. This chart shows the distributions of the stock market's annual return since 1928, with positive returns in green and negative returns in blue. As you can see, stocks gained around 73% of the time. Of course, the stock market fell the other 27% of the time, and some of those losses were large. But weathering those kinds of short-term losses is part of long-term investing. It can be a bit easier to weather those declining years once you understand that the longer you hold equities, the better chance the returns will be positive. This chart represents 10-year rolling periods. Once again, negative periods are in blue and positive periods are in green. There have been 89 10-year rolling periods from 1928 through 2025. So we're looking at 1928 to 1937, and 1929 to 1938, and so on. The market lost ground in only 5 of those 89 10-year periods. In other words, someone who held stocks for just 1 year had roughly a 27% chance of losing money, but someone who held stocks for 10 years had roughly just a 6% chance of losing money. Jumping back into anchoring, some common warning signs you might be experiencing it are, I'm still down 10%. I just want to get back to where I started. Or, 6 months ago, I had X amount of money, and now I have half that amount. If you've ever said those, remember to keep an open mind. Seek out information that will give you perspective and help you change your anchors. By letting progress towards your goals measure your success, you'll be less likely to anchor on one specific piece of information and instead look at the big picture. The next tendency we'll look at today is status quo bias. This refers to people's tendencies not to change and establish behavior unless the incentive to change is compelling. In other words, we keep our current situation or choices because it's easier to do nothing than to make changes. Think about magazines offering subscribe and cancel anytime guarantees. Why do they do that? They know the incentive isn't great enough for people to unsubscribe. That's why an initial investment plan is incredibly impactful. It has an enduring impact on your long-term goals. Signs that you might be experiencing status quo bias or procrastination are thoughts like these. I've had that investment for years and it's been good. There's no need to change it now. Or more than half my portfolio is invested in my company's stock. I've heard that's not such a good idea, but I'm not sure where else to invest. If those phrases sound familiar, one idea is to make a schedule and stick to it. By having a plan in place at the outset, you're more likely to stay on track. Just remember to revisit that plan every so often to make sure it still makes sense for your long-term goals. You can hold yourself accountable to others for your actions, so you're more likely to follow through on what you've planned to do. And lastly, every individual is unique and has unique motivators, so discover what yours are and use them to your advantage. Just remember to reward yourself along the way to achieving your goals. Now, we're halfway through. The fourth tendency we'll look at is similar to status quo bias, and it's something we're all guilty of in one way or another: procrastination. We have a bias towards the present, and procrastinating is the human body's way of dealing with the anxiety associated with the start of a complex task. And this holds true for investing too. People want to relax today and then invest next week. A simple example illustrates how people want to do the right thing, but they can't get past immediate gratification. This study asked, if people were deciding today what they would eat next week, would you choose fruit or chocolate? 74% of people chose fruit because they intend to eat better next week. But when they were asked what they would choose today, fruit or chocolate, only 30% of people chose fruit because we want that immediate gratification. Signs that you might be procrastinating are the following phrases. I really should join my company's retirement plan. I'll get to it next week. Or, our child just turned 10. We really should open a 529 account one of these days. If these sound familiar, as is with status quo bias, it's a good idea to have a plan in place, hold yourself accountable to others, and reward yourself along the way to your goals. Getting into our fifth tendency, we call this one barn door closing and hindsight bias. Basically, it's like looking at things in hindsight, locking the barn door after the horse has already run away, taking action after it's too late. An example in the investment world is moving money into cash after a dramatic market downturn. By then, it was likely too late, and you might have been better off staying in the market and riding out the storm. Even the experts experience this tendency. For example, after the housing market meltdown, the banks tightened credit and made it more difficult to get a loan. However, those tighter standards might have served the lenders well in the first place and prevented the meltdown if they would have been in place all along. And the same principle is at work when people say they are starting to work out and eat better right after a health scare. It's human nature to feel emotional about your investments, but acting on them is typically counterproductive. To manage the impact of emotion on investment performance, you can learn to recognize the emotional investment cycle. It starts when you're confident, you're saying, I've already made money, this is great. Things keep going well and you're euphoric. You're saying, I should quit my job and do this full time. Little do you know, that is the riskiest time to invest. Because things could take a downturn, you get nervous. You say, what happened? What's going on? Things continue downhill, you're desperate. You say, there's no point in selling. I've lost too much now. You become defeated and say, there go my dreams of early retirement. But that is your best opportunity to make money. Things take an uptick, you're hopeful, and you say they seem like they're turning around. Decades of research into investor behavior has found that people's emotions lead them to buy and sell precisely at the wrong times, as we just saw. The bars in the chart here show fund flows. So bars below the horizontal line in the center represent equity outflows. Investors are pulling money out of the stock market. As you can see, investors invariably took money out of the market after stocks had fallen, locking in their losses and missing out on the eventual recovery. Then they waited until stocks had posted steady gains for a while and got back into the market, usually just in time for a dip. A better approach is to not try and time the market. Which brings us to today's most important point. The key to benefiting from the stock market's growth potential is to stay in the stock market. If you pull your money out of the market, you risk missing its best days, and that can be extremely costly. Consider an investor who invested $10,000 in 2006 and matched the returns of the S&P 500 index. 20 years later, that investor would have $80,000, over $80,000. Now, say that investor jumped in and out of stocks at times and wound up missing the market's 10 best days. They'd have less than half as much as they would have otherwise, had they stayed fully invested over those 20 years. And if we keep going, if they miss the market's 30 best days, they'd have around 1/6 of what they would have had they stayed fully invested. And if they miss the best 40 days, they'd have 1/9. So clearly, being in the market for its best days is crucial, but no one knows when those days will be. So the only logical approach is to stay invested for the long haul. The bottom line, any investor who's lived through a bear market knows how unpleasant it can be. History shows, however, that US equities have always recovered, and bull markets have created far more wealth over time than bear markets have taken away. If history is any guide, we expect that you may see similar results. When it comes to hindsight bias, let me share the following warning signs. I don't care what happens next. I'm moving to cash until things calm down. And the market has done great this year. I knew I should have invested more. First, it's important to remember that you made the best decision you could have with the information you had at hand. Just be sure to reevaluate your plan based upon any market changes or changes in your personal situation. It's a common theme today, but it's important to keep a long-term perspective so you don't get too worried about what will likely end up being minor blips. And you write a letter to yourself to remind yourself of this fact. The final tendency we'll look at today is that of availability. This is the tendency to use the information on hand to make decisions. For example, excessive media coverage of a topic or issue will bring that issue to the forefront of your mind, likely affecting any related decisions. There's also the risk of overestimating the probability of an event because it's associated with a previous memory. Some common warning signs for the availability tendency bias include thoughts like these. I see people with iPads everywhere. Apple must be a good stock to own. And the guy on the TV says now is the time to buy gold. He must be right. He's on TV. If you have done this, here are some remedies for availability. In this day and age, we're exposed to such large quantities of information that it can be hard to process it all. Amid all of it, remember not to believe everything you hear. And remember that bad news sells newspapers. As a result, there are more negative front page headlines than there are positive ones. Also, we're all human and make mistakes. Sometimes we're wrong, even the experts. A systematic and automatic investing plan can help you weather both up and down markets and minimize the chance that availability will take over your decisions. To summarize what we've talked about today, I'd like to do a quick recap. Parts of your brain literally shut down in times of extreme stress. As a result, we all tend to be emotional instead of rational in times of crisis. Remember the warning signs we discussed and have a plan in place to remedy any issues that may arise. By approaching investing with a new mindset, you just might be able to minimize the effect that these tendencies have on your long-term goals. So today in My Brain Made Me Do It, we learned how we typically make decisions, how our decision-making processes contribute to common investment mistakes, and how to train our brains to avoid those mistakes. We're here to help you and your clients every step of the way. For any of the information on the lessons discussed today, please speak with your financial professional or anyone at Strong Daddy Lee Wealth Management.
Thank you, Mary.
Of
This was
course.
it was a good reminder for us all to stay focused on our goals, trust the process, and not let short-term emotions derail us from long-term successes. So great presentation,
Exactly.
a lot of good
Couldn't
information.
have put it better.
Yeah. Thank you so much again for joining. And again,
Of
as
course.
Mary mentioned, if you have any questions, please reach out to us at SGL. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Mhm.